Lesson 62 is about fractional part word problems. Now we know how to solve problems with fractional parts, and we know how to solve word problems. We just need to put them together in this lesson. Now our first question says, 5/8 of the gnomes who lived in the magic forest had happy faces. If 840 gnomes had happy faces, how many gnomes lived in the magic forest? So, in order to solve this question, we need to write an initial equation. We know 5/8 of the gnomes, so of means multiply. So we've got 5/8 of the gnomes, we'll call them G for gnomes, 5/8 times G, who lived in the forest had happy faces. Now had, that tells us what was going on, so that's going to be like is. So equals happy faces. We'll call that HF for happy faces. 5/8 of the gnomes had happy faces. Now in this problem it says if 840 gnomes had happy faces, how many gnomes lived in the forest, or lived in the magic forest? So what we need to do, we know 840 is the number of gnomes who had happy faces, HF. So we can say 5/8 of the gnomes, G, that's the total number of gnomes who lived in the magic forest, is going to equal 840. Now from here, we know in order to undo multiplication of a fraction and times a variable, we need to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to multiply 5/8 times 8/5. That will cancel the 5's. It will cancel the 8's. So we now know the number of gnomes, G. But we need to balance out the other side of our equation by multiplying by 8/5 as well. We're going to say 840 over 1. Now we can go ahead and figure out our answer. This box will tell us how many gnomes there were in the magic forest. Now 840 is definitely divisible by 5. Let's see what we get when we do that division. 840 divided by 5. Well, 5 goes into 8 one time. We get 5 with 3 left over, and we bring down our 4. 5 goes into 34 6 times. We get 30 with 4 left over. We've got just enough room to bring down our 0, and we know 5 goes into 40 8 times exactly. So we get 168. We can say, well, the 5 is going to become a 1, and the 840 is going to become a 168. Got a lot of colors today. So, G, we'll go back to blue. G is going to be equal to 168 times 8, and that's all over 1. So 168 times 8 will give us our answer. Let's go ahead and multiply. We need to erase our division here of 840 divided by 5 to have enough room. And we can go ahead and solve 168 divided by 8, or times 8. Eight times 8 is going to give us 64. Carry our 6. 8 times 6 is 48. And 48 plus 6 is going to give us 54. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 5 more is 13. We have 1,344. So the number of gnomes who lived in the magic forest, G, must be equal to 1,344. Since it's a word problem, let's add our label. It must be gnomes. We've got our answer. We can go ahead and box it and move on to our next question. In order to do this problem, we had to write our initial equation. Then we had to substitute the value that we knew in to the equation for happy faces. Then we had to solve for G by multiplying by the reciprocal and simplifying before we multiply. Let's look at our next problem. Here we have, on Monday, 2 3/4 times the acceptable number of rock badgers took refuge in the mountain caves. If 640 was the acceptable number, how many rock badgers took refuge in the mountain caves on Monday? So, 2 3/4 times the acceptable number took refuge. So, 2 3/4, and it even says it, times the acceptable number, we'll call that AN for acceptable number, took refuge in the mountain caves. So equals the mountain caves, MC. If 640 was the acceptable number, how many took refuge in the mountain caves on Monday? So the acceptable number was 640. It says so right there. 640 was the acceptable number. So we can substitute that in to solve. We're going to get 2 3/4 times the acceptable number of 640. It's going to be equal to how many were in the mountain caves, MC. Now we don't really need a dot and parentheses to show multiplication, but it's nice to substitute values in within parentheses, so we know we've substituted. Well, to find our answer, we can multiply. We need to change 2 3/4 to an improper fraction. That's 11/4. We have 11/4 times 640 over 1 is equal to the number of badgers in the mountain caves. Well, let's see if 4 goes into 640. First, we know we could cut them in half. So the 4 is going to become a 2, and the 640 will become 320. We could cut those in half again. The 2 becomes a 1, and half of 320 must be 160. So we now have a 1 in our denominator. That's always nice. Okay? And we have 11 times 160. That's going to tell us how many badgers were in the mountain caves. 160 times 11. Well, we got 1 times 0, that's 0. 1 times 6 is 6. And 1 times 1 is 1. We've got 0 as a placeholder. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 6 is 6. And 1 times 1 is 1. We add. We've got 0, 6, 7, and 1. So we've got 1,760. Okay, how many badgers took refuge in the mountain caves on Monday? It must be 1,760 badgers. We got our answer by going through the same process we did before. We write our initial equation, we substitute in what we know, we simplify before we multiply, and then we find our answer with our label attached on the end. Lesson practice will be on page 199. Make sure you've got your notes complete, and I'll see you during our next class.